And joining us now on the debate about debates, in Vancouver, British Columbia, Elizabeth May, leader of the Green Party of Canada. In Fredericton, New Brunswick, Mark Bulgutch, executive producer of many national and provincial leaders' debates. And back here in studio, Trina McQueen, former senior executive of both CBC and CTV and moderator of one of the national leaders' debates in 2005. And Robin Sears, principal at Navigator Limited, whose political resume would take up half the show if I were to read it here, so I won't, but I'm sure it will emerge during the course of the discussion. Welcome, one and all. Good to have you guys here. And of course, in Points Beyond. Mark, you've done so many of these things, so you get the first question. What's the purpose of a leaders' debate? Basic question off the top.
Well, I mean, from the television network's point of view, I think the purpose is to help Canadians decide who they're going to vote for. It's it's not a platform for the leaders. It's simply to give a lot of Canadians who aren't necessarily paying a lot of attention to the ins and outs of an election campaign a chance on one night to see the leaders and have a go at it.
And Robin, generally speaking, in this country, do the debates achieve that?
No, sir. They fall far short, and I suspect we'll get into that.
We will get into reasons, but why such a categorical no? We're not doing it very well.
Because they're stone cold boring.
Don't hold back. Tell me what you really think.
Well, I mean, let me start with a very basic problem. Debate means hypothesis, antithesis. That implies two participants and maybe a moderator. When you get to six, it doesn't work so good.
Elizabeth May, you've been in one of these things where it was not one-on-one, but I guess 4-on-1. Do you agree with Robin's assessment?
Well, no, I think that when you have a lot of people in a debate, it doesn't mean it ceases to be less interesting or less helpful for the public. I think of the huge lineup of Democratic candidates for the U.S. Democratic nomination when Barack Obama and Hillary Clinton were two of many. And I think a lot of Canadians found those useful and interesting to watch as observers from another country. I don't think it's the number of people in the debates that's a problem. I think we lack some predictability, some rules, some transparency around how the debates are organized. And frankly, I think the Canadian public is less interested than the media is in the knockout punch and the excitement, and really quite interested in getting a measure of what these parties stand for, how their leaders express what they care about. And I find a lot of people, given how many people come up to me and say, loved you in the debates, a lot of people watch them.
Trina McQueen, given the way Mark Bulgutch has decided, or has described rather, what they're about, and given Robin's response that he thinks they fail at what they're supposed to be about, are you with him or are you with those who say actually they're okay?
Well, okay is not a great commendation. I would say they are okay. Are they great? No. Are they debates? No. I believe that in effect they are game shows.
Game shows?
Game shows. You've got a bunch of people, just like on the dance shows and the singing shows, who are performing in the hopes that the audience will vote them the prize. So you think you can lead Canada. Except, as Robin says, it's a very dull so you think you can lead Canada.
No.
There's no spontaneity, as Elizabeth said. There's a lot of predictability. There's no sense of risk, no sense of the moment in which we can really illuminate and see through things. They're spun so fine, they could be a hotel bedsheet. They are just, as I say, game shows.
Okay, well, I've got to ask Mark Bulgutch why he's produced so many terrible debates over the years. Okay, Mark, come on in here.
Well, it's because people like Elizabeth May, though not her personally, obviously, the politicians don't want a freewheeling, entertaining debate. They have a lot to lose, and I think most politicians going into a debate, I've never been a politician, are not worried about winning the debate so much as they're worried about losing the debate. No. And so they go in there and their negotiators beforehand try to come up with a debate format that reduces the risk to their leader. And so, as quiet as they can get it, less interaction, that's what they want. And, the networks aren't in a position to say, here are the rules, here's what we're doing, see you next Tuesday. That's not how it works. And so it's, it could be a game show. And if you let, our entertainment producers or even our news producers really do what they want to do, you may not get what you're getting now, but it is a two-way street. We don't just tell people, show up, here's the game, and let's go. I wish we could.
Robin, when Mark said, no, they don't, it's not about winning, it's about making sure you don't lose or not looking bad, you said, no, that's not true. You don't agree?
No, I mean, he interacts with the handlers, obviously, in the preparation of the debate, and as a recovering political hack, I can certainly identify with that, but I never met a candidate who didn't think he wasn't going to whip the opponent's ass walking into the studio. The leaders are convinced they're going to win. That's part of, you know, the testosterone and, excuse me, Elizabeth, the adrenaline of being a politician. But I think the challenge is constrained by two variables. We've touched on one of them. The handlers want to create a safety zone for their leader. But the networks are a problem as well, because the networks have a television lens and a television imperative through which they look at this production. A third party is a logical person to be in charge of framing the debate and to say, these are the rules, and if you don't want to come, don't come.
Okay, let's go there, Cynthia, because Queen's University, the Center for the Study of Democracy, published a paper called Fit Debates: Fair, Informative, and Tantalizing, which I guess would speak to what you say, or both of you, which is that they're boring game shows. They had some criticisms of the way we do debates, and let me just put some of these and we'll go around the table on this. They are decisively not transparent, the Queen's study says, negotiated in private by highly biased parties. Elizabeth May, is that true?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, we as viewers will recall, in the last election campaign, I was initially told the Green Party couldn't be included in the debates without being given a clear reason, and then found that it was because Stephen Harper and Jack Layton had said if I was included, they wouldn't participate. So Joe Clark termed that blackmail. As we all recall, it became a huge cause célèbre, and thanks to Canadians, the other two party leaders relented. But if there were rules, if there were criteria, if there was a third party, in the US they have a presidential commission, which is not the networks, which decides how the debates are structured and who's in them. This would, I think, assist having fair and transparent. There's nothing transparent about the process. As a matter of fact, to this day, the media consortium won't let the Greens know if we're in or out of the next debates. I rather think we will be, but they say they make up their minds after the writ drops, and they have been very clear they have no rules and no criteria other than what's in the public interest as those 5 network heads see it at the moment.
We will get to whether or not we need to create some very hard and fast criteria in a moment, but I do want to get Mark Bulgutch to respond, first of all, to this Queen's study, which says that it's not transparent, it's negotiated in private by highly biased parties. Do you think that's true?
It's not transparent. I'm not sure. I mean, the biased parties, I guess, would refer to the political parties
And the networks.
and the networks. But I mean, what is the bias of the network? The bias of the network is to make a program, I think. I mean, and I should say, I mean, for the record, I'm not the network's spokesman. I'm not. So I know if
but you've been part of the
CTV
consortium
is listening, or even from the CBC. But generally, from the inside, I mean, the networks want a program that is illuminating in some way, you would hope is somewhat entertaining, and that's what they want. To say, you know, that the blackmail from the last time, which is, you know, the most recent experience, I mean, I probably wouldn't use that word because of where I work and who I am, but I mean, there's no question that the networks don't want a debate without the Prime Minister.
But Mark, it's not your fault, and I wouldn't blame you for this, but the reality is, if the leader of a party that is likely to become government says, do this or else to the president of your network, it puts you in an impossible position. And that's why it's not appropriate for you to be in that position. There should be another institution whose job it is to frame what is a very important part of the national choice. The networks are, by definition of being public licensees, subject to a political process, compromised.
Let me ask Trina about that.
Well, first of all, the networks, I think, in this country, have the ability, clearly, to say no to a prime minister. We are licensed by an arm's length body.
That he appoints.
That he appoints, but an arm's length body.
And you never have.
Never have what?
Said no to a prime minister.
Never have said no to a prime minister, but could and possibly should. It was very hard in that particular situation to figure out exactly what the right thing was to do, because there were no real rules. There's no statement of how they should be conducted. I think it would be just fine to have a bunch of people of estimable worth, Order of Canada members or something, academics.
She says wearing her Order of Canada,
well,
notice, anyway.
Yeah, but so Paul Schaefer is a member of the Order of Canada, you know, what is he?
Yeah, he doesn't, and I'm not suggesting, I was just using
Yeah.
that as a definition for worthy citizens of some background and experience to do it. What I worry about that is that if part of this is to engage Canadians, you've got a group over here who are really interested in macroeconomic policy and want to see the politicians go at that. And you've got another whole group of people who are just tasting this, and it may be their only time to get the sense of who the man or the woman is, to look at the trust factors, to look at how adept they are on their feet. And if you divorce the networks from these things, my belief is that it will be an even stodgier show and an even less appealing show and engaging show.
Let me ask Elizabeth May just to remind us of the history here, because this scenario which we've described here, where the Prime Minister says, you know, if this is the rule, I'm not showing up, namely your inclusion the last time around. By your recollection, did any network president or any network representative from the consortium say to the Prime Minister, well, look at, you know, you have to? Did he got stared down?
Yeah, no, it's interesting that this whole thing started, which I only discovered in an online article by Tony Berman, who had been the chair of the consortium when they first engaged with the Green Party to say, we might want to put you in the debates, we're thinking it through, and they were very honest. We have no rules, we have no criteria, we're not sure what to do, but clearly Greens are in contention in 2000, and in the next election we didn't know when it would be, in a way you weren't before. So that conversation happened with the consortium in January 2007. And Tony Berman wrote online in the midst of the furor in the election of 2008 that they had approached the Prime Minister at that time, or the Conservative Party, and the word had come back, if the Greens are included, the Prime Minister won't show up at the debates. And then it was more than a year later that, and I don't know at what point Jack Layton decided to take the same stance, but those positions that they took were completely secret. Now, did the network stand up to them? No, not to my knowledge, and Tony Berman, by the way, is one of those who was an ex-head of CBC National News and as now ex-CBC, said this shouldn't be the consortium's decision. This needs to be arm's length. This needs to be an independent commission, because it's just too tough, as Robin says, to say no to a Prime Minister.
Well, this is what Martin Redcon from the Toronto Star, who presented to a Queen's University conference on this a little while ago, and who's not much of a fan of the consortium, this is what he had to say. In Canada, instead of a network consortium, we need a consortium that is networked, bringing together some of our top universities, civic institutions, and foundations. Okay, let's call it a cooperative, operating transparently and independently. Make it accountable. Why not anchor it in the Centre for the Study of Democracy at Queen's, and link it with the newly merged Historica Dominion Institute or other think tanks? Mark Bulgutch, I know you're not here today as a spokesperson for the consortium. Let's just say that. You're a guy who's produced these debates. But having said that, do you think there's a better way to organize them?
There may be, but I haven't heard it yet. I mean, what is accountable about a group of eminent people? I mean, the experience from the last time surely shows that if, you know, to say the consortium has no rules, has no criteria, we were the ones who in the end bent. I mean, the public in the end got what they wanted, apparently. You know, they were the ones who raised the ruckus, and the networks changed their minds. Can you imagine a fixed commission doing that? No,
Yeah,
it would have the rules,
Well,
and it would
actually,
say,
it wasn't
we'd
the
love to
networks.
do it, but we can't because these are the rules.
You
We
were
didn't have
forced-
rules, and we were
Mark,
flexible.
can I just
Hang
say,
on, one at a
Steve-
time. Let's get Elizabeth, then Robin.
Just quickly, Mark, it wasn't the networks that changed their minds. First, Jack Layton and then Stephen Harper changed their minds and said they would participate, and then that's when the Greens were allowed in the debate. So I don't know that plays a particular role in why you wouldn't or would not have it be arm's length.
Well, because, I mean, I would seem to me that, yes, that's what happened, but it was the public that forced the Conservatives and the NDP to change their minds. They didn't do it willy-nilly
right.
or out of the goodness of their hearts. So all I'm saying that is because the networks were flexible and because we don't have a written set of rules, it seems to me that any kind of government or quasi-government body would, you know, you want rules. Here are the rules, and let's say one of the rules is you have to have 5% or something in the national polls, whatever that means. National polls, there's so many of them. What does that mean? You have to have 5% in all the polls, some of the polls. But let us say that the Greens were at 4.8 on average. So for that 0.2 points, we're not going to let you into debates. Because that's the rule. Well, what if the public then rose up and said, let them in, what's 0.2 points? And they'd say, no, the rule is this, 5. The networks might say, well, what the heck, there's no rule, let them in.
Robin, maybe this idea of yours is not as responsive as Mark suggests.
Let's be frank about what's at issue here. What's at issue here is power. And where power is concerned, those who are susceptible to it being used against them have to be a little bit more candid than some of us are being around the table here about how great their freedom to make a decision in stark opposition to the expressed authority of somebody who has power is. No network is ever going to say no to any prime minister. Trina, hasn't happened, won't happen.
Well,
so let's
Because
try.
why?
Because that network subsequently depends on the good offices of a government that controls their license and therefore their bread and butter.
I would
so
argue,
let's try and
though,
envisage
Robin,
a circumstance where we take as much of the power pressure off all the players. I agree entirely with Trina that the leaders shouldn't be allowed to be as scripted and as talking on point and on message as this system permits them to be, and neither should the networks be as susceptible to pressure from the parties in government or not. Let's try and create a space in which a real debate can take place where a moderator, such as a Steve Paikin, who is not accountable to a network, I'd have to say you'd have to take a leave of absence or something, and the framework of the discussion around the debate takes place outside of the power politics that drive the discussion today.
Trina.
well, first of all, I would just say that every network news department says no to the Prime Minister in terms of coverage almost every night. So setting that aside, what I think is important to think about is whether or not this debate engages the largest possible number of people. And I hate to tell you, but all the networks combined now have less or about a third of the viewing audience.
This is CBC, CTV, Global.
A Channel, City, including other stations such as TVO. If you put those all together, it's the third of the viewing audience. So this whole argument has been about something that happened a long time ago instead of what is going to happen. To me, the central issue for the debates is they are occupying a space in the television landscape that is getting narrow and narrower. And how do we broaden that out to look at other screens,
I'm going to come
even
back to
specialty
that.
channel
I am going to come back
screens?
to that in a second because that was part of the Queen's report, but I'm not done with this consortium business yet. Mark, can you imagine that the Broadcasting Consortium, and again, you don't speak for them, but you've been part of it and you may have some insight into how they think, the executives of the networks, can you imagine them wanting to relieve themselves of this responsibility of having to sort of decide who's in and who's not?
Well, I mean, look, Elizabeth May made a reference to Tony Berman, who ran the CBC and, who I have a lot of respect for. He really did want to wash his hands of it. I don't think it was entirely because it was a lot of work and who needs the stress. I think Tony believed that it was time to move it off our plate. But, I mean, I know Trina, how she feels about it. I must say, Tony's the only person from within the consortium that I have heard be anxious to relieve themselves of this problem or of this issue. I think most of the networks don't consider it a problem. They consider it something they want to do. They're anxious to do. They consider it a service. And even the private networks, which I'm not a great fan of their news departments because I've worked at the other side for so long. But I must tell you, they completely are on board about this. They don't say, oh my God, we have to do the debates. They're happy to do it. They're anxious to do it. They do see it as a public service.
Elizabeth May?
I have to say, Mark, I've spoken to Robert Hurst, who's the current chair of the consortium, and he says the same thing that Tony Berman said, at least to me. Robert Hurst has said, this is not something we want to do. If you could get a separate commission, arm's length, that would be great, because the burden it places, it's an awful position to put these are, of course, for people who don't know what the consortium, we throw the word around. It's the 5 networks, TVA, Radio-Canada, CBC, Global, and CTV. The head of their network news divisions have to, as 5 individuals essentially, decide what the parameters of a debate will be, how many there will be, English and French, which leaders, all of the details. And as Robin has said, a lot of negotiating with people who are somewhere between spin doctors and assistants to the leaders. it's not easy, and it's fraught with conflict of interest, because these same people have to cover these politicians and their parties, not just through the election campaign, but through the regular governing of the country. It's not an easy position for them to be in, and they are struggling, I think, quite genuinely all the time with what's the right thing to do
Okay,
here.
let me follow up with Robin Sears on that then. Do you think, regardless of whether it's a consortium or an outside group of eminent people with the Orders of Canada, whatever, do you think that there should be objective, measurable criteria in place, such as you can't play if you don't have a seat, you can't play if you're not at 5%, you can't play if you don't run candidates in more than one province, that kind of thing?
Yeah, there have to be. I don't know what the number is right now, Steve, but I think we have something like 16 registered political parties in Canada, and obviously they can't all play. And the difference between a discussion on the agenda, such as we're having, with a group of people sitting around a table, and a debate where you have two people presenting pro and con choices, is a profound difference. And that's what I'd love to get back to. I'd love to see a series of one-on-one or one-on-two debates over several nights spread across a campaign, perhaps covering different subject matters. We're just at the tail end of a municipal campaign in Ontario. Many people will have participated in some of the events locally. More than 50 major debates have taken place in the Toronto Mayoralty contest since the beginning. And that doesn't even include dozens more neighborhood debates. Wouldn't that be exciting?
Trina, could you see a situation whereby you had one-on-one debates, the leader of the Liberals against the leader of the Democrats, the leader of the Greens against the leader of the Conservatives, and roll those out over a week or a couple of weeks' time?
I guess I'd go beyond that. I'd like to see more debates around specific issues by people who aren't necessarily the leaders. I'd like, as a citizen, to get a look at the team, to be able to see who the finance critics together, to be able to see the cultural critics together, and to have these perhaps put on the specialty channels that have the proper niches. For instance, the business channels could do the finance debates, Bravo could do the arts debates, and so on. So that through the campaign, you'd have a chance not just to see the leaders via their handlers, but also to see a number of people who would be part of the governing team.
Well, let me follow up. You ran the Discovery Channel.
Yeah.
Did you ever, run this idea past your board?
Never entered my head at the time. We were doing other things, but if it had entered my head, I would have done it.
But Steve,
Go ahead, Mark.
when I was kind of part of News World, now News Network at CBC, we did this. Every week we would do, from Ottawa, we would get the finance critics or the foreign affairs critics or the health critics of the parties and have a debate. I know Robin wouldn't call it that. But it was just another program. I mean, it didn't capture the imagination of Canadians. And so, again, you're talking to the committed all the time. And I think what the big network leader debates do is capture, the non-committed, the person who just votes. That's their political moment. And, all these other debates are great, but you're talking to the same inside people.
Well,
I mean,
Mark,
they have value, but they don't have this big value.
Mark, I think that the reason the debates have the big value is because the other media cover them. Print covers them, radio covers them, online covers them. But what I see is a shrinking audience potential for these debates.
How many people watch these things?
3 million is about the average, and 3 million is what you get for, like 10 million is what you get for the Canada-Russia hockey game.
So 3's not bad then.
3's okay, but it's on every single network. The 3 that you get for a big American show or maybe the Stanley Cup final is on one network. So, and how many voters are there in this country? People of voting age, 18 million? Something like that. So, it's not a really populist sport to watch these debates.
Robin?
Can I add an ingredient we haven't touched on here, Stephen? I would never have said this when I was a political hack, and I apologize to all of my contemporaries who are in this business today. The role of the journalists in the debate, and I think it probably should be more than one, is something that determines significantly whether a debate is useful as a way of providing voters with an opportunity to make real assessments of candidates or not. Debates are fundamentally about assessing character and integrity. They're about testing somebody's ability as a leader in a very stressful circumstance, much less than they are about substance. And nobody can bring that out and shine a spotlight on strength or weakness better than a great debate moderator or moderators. And so I think one of the things the parties are going to have to give up, if it isn't going to become stillborn and pointless, as Trina fears, is to allow a much more vigorous role for perhaps a moderator and a panel of journalists, and the freedom to grill and to push and to come back, even at the expense of the politicians' airtime or comfort level.
Can you imagine the parties going for that?
If there were an independent forum, and the forum was absolutely confident about its determination to do that, sure, there'd be lots of shouting and shoving and pushing, but one empty chair once would be the only time it would happen.
Mark, can you see that happening?
But isn't that a debate? It sounds like a debate between journalists and the leader rather than a debate amongst the leaders, doesn't it?
Yeah, and I think we're putting too much emphasis on how much people really, in Robin's point, that this is the testing of the mettle of the individual leader. I think what I hear from Canadians about why they like watching the debates, or what they felt I brought to them, was content and discussing the issues, and they really liked it when leaders engaged and actually discussed. I think the citizenry is much more interested in the substance than you think they are, and if we had that kind of a roundtable discussion where journalists do prompt and provoke and see how that goes, that wouldn't be a bad idea. But I don't think it's so much that the public wants to test me. That's a very Americanized idea because it's the president. And this is one point I wanted to bring up again. In the Canadian and in a Westminster parliamentary tradition, it shouldn't be all about the leader. It should be more about the team, and that's why it wasn't until the last election in the UK that they had a UK leaders debate, because Westminster parliamentary democracy, we don't elect a prime minister.
Okay, but while you've got the floor, Elizabeth May, let me ask you,
Yeah.
double back to something that we talked about earlier, which was if there were objective criteria in place that were easily measurable, you might not get to play, right? You might not make the threshold of the public opinion polls. You don't have any seats right now. Would you be content to live with those rules?
Well, we actually were asked by the consortium, the Green Party was asked to suggest some criteria, because you've got some problems. Like, we run a full slate across the country. On the other hand, we wouldn't want that rule in place because that would exclude the Bloc Québécois, which clearly has 49 seats. On the other hand, they were only a couple 100,000 more votes than the Greens because we had about 1 million seats. So you need some sliding criteria. And what we had proposed to the consortium was sort of 4 out of 5 or 3 out of 4, something that allows you the flexibility to deal with the complexities of the Canadian political landscape. So, it's an interesting question. Would we live with rules that excluded us? Probably not. But I think that any fair set of rules wouldn't exclude us at this point of our established role in the Canadian political scene.
Well, Mark, speaking of exclusion, the question I get asked all the time is, why is the Bloc Québécois involved in the English debate? What's the answer to that?
The answer is that...
No, hang on, Mark. I want to hear Mark on that.
Well, I mean, there is, again, without revealing all the great secrets of this mysterious consortium, there is debate within the consortium about whether the Bloc belongs in the English debate, because, even if you thought these are the greatest people on the face of the earth and you lived in Saskatchewan, you couldn't vote for them, so what are they doing? There are Anglophones in Quebec who can vote for them, and so, that's part of the reason they're there. They're there also because they make up a big part of the House of Commons, and to see how the leaders react with and to the leader of the Bloc Québécois would have some value, and to just see who they are. I mean, that's why they're there, but there is debate.
But the interchange in the House of Commons with the Bloc is always in French, so no one's arguing about whether to allow them to participate in the French debate. But if there were a move right now to exclude them from the English language debate, would that cause some kind of national crisis?
Who do I know? There'd be no crisis amongst the consortium would have faced a crisis because there would be a huge lobby being very unhappy with this. I mean, look, the networks, to say they don't react, I mean, the thing about the networks is that they are very sensitive to public opinion, right? Not because there's nobody protecting them, there's no rule they can say can't come in because of this. A decision to eliminate the Bloc from the English debate would cause a kerfuffle, and no network likes a kerfuffle. If everybody would just agree and quietly come and do the debate and have a rousing debate, there would be nobody happier than the networks.
And are you generally, Mark, content with the kind of nebulous criteria that exist on who gets to play right now?
I'm fairly happy because it leaves the consortium people with a chance to kind of skate, dance, think, mull, And and I say,
be politically pressured.
Like I remember, the Green Party, though, there was always this false belief that if you had a seat, you were in, and the Greens had a floor crosser, and suddenly they had a seat, and then there was this thing in the consortium saying, well, they have a seat, but is that a legitimate seat? They were never elected to, so have a seat. You can get a seat in a lot of ways in this country. Maybe the wording has to be elected to a seat. You see, so all these things, the consortium at least has some flexibility to just do what it believes is right at the end of the day. And so that's why a hard and fast set of rules is something that is difficult to deal with.
Trina, let me come back to you, the point, as promised, you made earlier about how one-third of the audience is now on sort of network television in this country, and that excludes a lot of people. One of the things the Queen study said was that the sole medium used for these debates, television, is outdated and not an effective way of stimulating public engagement. You've talked about where the role for potential specialty channels or cable could be. What about internet? Do they think at all about social media and how it might have a role to play in leaders' debates?
I think all these things should be part of it, but I really do believe that television is at the core. I'm just concerned about whether network television is the vehicle that we should be spending all our time worrying about, and whether there are other places. But sure, there's Twitter and there's Facebook, and you could have some fun by putting some Twitter feeds up during the debate. That would be interesting.
Could that take away from the gravitas of the event?
Well, I don't know whether it has so much gravitas or nitolitas. So, I'm being hard on the debates, and that's because people like me rush home to watch them. I love them, every single one of them. But I know that there's a whole group of people who do not watch the debates simply because they are pitched at people like the incredibly savvy, politically aware TVO audience. That's their home. And I just think that we need to get outside that core of political junkies and get a lot more people involved and watching these
Robin,
debates.
how would you do that with social media?
Yeah, I would sacrifice gravitas happily. I mean, if you had a moderated Twitter crawl across the bottom of the screen, or if you as the moderator had something in front of it, you could say, George from Saskatoon has just suggested the following, I think that's fine. The American networks do some of that now. But I think, much of what we're debating here about the challenge of who's in and who's out and how it should be structured could be resolved by simply having more. If you had 20 debates, if you had a dozen debates involving different people and different subjects, you could, A, be driving the conversation in the campaign far more seriously than happens in a federal provincial election, and B, you'd be giving people a much broader opportunity to watch the politicians interacting with each other. Anybody who's watching any of the mayoralty campaigns in the big cities in Ontario right now has a far better insight into the candidates than any voters in a federal provincial contest.
I hear you, but let me follow up with this, and this is no disrespect to Ms. May, but people might tune in to see Elizabeth May take on Stephen Harper. I'm not so sure they'd tune in to see Elizabeth May take on Gilles Duceppe. Would you agree? Would that be a problem?
You'd have to be very careful about the talent selection and the matchups. It'd be like setting up a wrestling card. You'd want to make sure there were interesting
I'd send George
competitors.
Larac in for that one.
Yeah, George would do well. Okay.
Actually, I'd like to see Elizabeth versus Gilles. That wouldn't be a bad matchup.
Yeah,
Cage
you
match.
would, but
yeah,
again,
yeah.
is that
I know,
a
right?
populist thing?
No, it
But I
isn't
think
a-
that this is the focus on making it a debate all the time, and it is called the debates. But really, even in the roundtable discussion format of bringing out where the difference of opinions really lie on policy questions is something that voters want to hear and want to see. And I think that having at least a few fora that include all the leaders, but also allowing those debates that we mentioned of finance critics versus finance critics and environment critics versus environment critics, that would also help with what is really a critical process of public discernment. And a lot of the network media coverage of election campaigns, which we haven't talked about outside of the debates, what voters mostly hear about is who's had a good day, whose campaign looked flawless, whose clothes worked, whose luggage didn't get lost. So the substantive issue content is really something that voters want to hear more about.
Okay, let's, in our last few minutes then, and Mark Belgutch, I'll start with you first on this, let's figure out whether all of the criticisms, observations you've had tonight have any chance of taking place. Mark, how much appetite do you see among the political parties and their representatives for implementing any of the kinds of changes you've talked about today?
None. I can't imagine the leaders of the parties agreeing to, like, I mean, 2 elections ago, we managed to get 2 debates out of them because it was a longer campaign over the Christmas period. And remember, every time we talk about a number of debates, you double it because there has to be a French one for every English one. And the parties take a lot of time preparing for debates. They don't want to suspend their campaign for a debate every 4 or 5 days. It's not going to happen. You know, I mean, sure, great, I'm happy. And the finance critics against the health critics, the main channels of the big networks are not going to give up their normal regular programming for that. And you know, an arm's length body, I don't think we're suggesting that they force the networks to do this, like for 3 out of the 5 nights of their weeknights. It's not going to happen. So we really should be concentrating, I think, on improving the one debate that everybody is going to see.
Trina
Not
McQueen?
the ones on the little channels, not the ones that are never going to happen. The one we now have. How do we get that better? I
Well,
think it's not bad now, myself.
I think it's not bad now, and I'm sorry, and we keep trying. Every single debate has been different from every other debate. I think there have been improvements. The roundtable, I think, was a great improvement. Audience participation, sending in questions was, I thought, pretty good. But I guess I come back to the point that you keep talking about the big networks. They're not as big as they used to be, and other ways of getting information are taking over. So to me, that's a big question. Will the political parties cooperate? It goes back to, you know, your question about, do they have the strength and the will to override some of the considerations that I think that the networks have and that citizens have. Citizens showed that they could make a change in the political ideas about the debate during the Elizabeth May kerfuffle, if we can call it that.
Okay.
If citizens showed more often what they want for the debate, yeah, I think there could be changes.
Here's how I'd do it, Steve.
Sure.
Very quickly. Networks say, we're happy not to do it. Consortium of outsiders steps up with some funding from a couple of foundations and says, we will. Networks say, we will take the program content they generate. Then the parties are in a box and they can't get out of it.
I got less than a minute here, and you're the great political historian here, if I say so myself. Back to Mark Bulguch's original question. These things are designed to help people figure out who to vote for. What's the one debate that you can remember where somebody actually said something where an election turned on it?
Well, of course, Turner Mulroney is the most famous case, but there are several cases at the provincial level people won't probably recall. Jean Charest is Premier of Quebec today because of his domination of a debate at the closing stages of his first campaign. I would argue there were some other provinces, without going into any details, where the same thing was true. Yeah, absolutely, they can make a huge difference.
But the "you had an option, sir" is still the best example in Canadian
Federally,
history.
I think that's the one that's up there with the Kennedy-Nixon debate.
Okay. 50 years ago tomorrow, we come full circle. Thanks everybody for participating. Elizabeth May, the leader of the Green Party in Vancouver, BC. Mark Bulguch, who's done so many leaders' debates. How many actually, Mark?
I've run out of fingers.
You run out of fingers. I knew it was more than 2 hands. Did you do Turner Mulroney?
No, I'm not that old. I watched it.
Okay. Debate producer, thanks for being there on the line from Fredericton, New Brunswick for us. Trina McQueen, Robin Sears here in our studios. Thanks so much, everybody.